introduce the panel. To my immediate left is Jeff Stoops from SBA and the chairman of the GCIA Board of Directors. Next is John Kelly of Crown Castle, former chairman of the GCIA Board of Directors. Jim Fakewood next from American Tower, the vice chairman of the Board of Directors, and Yuri Elliott from Global Signal. So welcome, gentlemen. Before we start with a question, I want to acknowledge our session sponsor. They've sponsored the session for many years running, and we really appreciate their support. It is SiteMaster, and Bud Babb, I know, is here with a team from the company. Would you all stand up? And Bud, you just give the crowd a wave so they know who you are. Thank you very much, Bud. Really appreciate your support. So, gentlemen, let's talk about the industry. And let's start with the usual question. What's your overview of the industry as we meet this year? It's always a little bit different from year to year. And can we start with Jeff and go on down the line?
Sure. Good morning, everybody. If you all want to leave, we wouldn't even know because these lights are so bright. We're very bullish at SBA on the industry. We have seen over the last couple of years what feels to be a settling in of steady carrier improvements to their networks, obviously fueled by great uptake by the consumers of wireless devices and as we move to data. And we really see the next several years playing out much like the last, which I think, speaking for all of us, we've enjoyed quite a bit in the wireless industry. A couple things have recently happened which further underscore that optimism. The AWS auctions recently concluded, $13.7 billion spent on spectrum, which is going to ultimately be put into use over time. That's only going to help fuel that continued investment by our customers and their infrastructure. And as we continue to look at the key indicators, wireless minutes of use grow, data continues to grow. We know all of those things mean more infrastructure is needed, greater focus on network quality. So when you mix all those signs together, to us it feels like it's going to be continue to be a good several years going forward. Ron?
Yeah, and I would echo that. I was thinking about, as I looked around the room over here at the various different logos, how big an ecosystem this really is, what we're all doing as companies to bring wireless services to the consumers, and that's really where you kind of start when you think about the issue of how's the industry doing. Any given company within that ecosystem might be doing better than another, but if you look at the macro trends, as Jeff was indicating, the industry just came out with, the cellular carrier just came out with their statistics for the 6 months ending June. There was another 25 million subscribers added net through the end of June. That was just off of a record 25.7, so just about a record number. Something that I think is just unbelievable. 850 billion minutes of use in the first 6 months of 2006. That's up 27% from a year ago. And for everybody in the room that certainly understands the law of big numbers, when you talk about 27% growth year over year, it's one thing if it's a couple hundred million. But we're approaching 1 trillion minutes in a 6-month period. That 27% growth rate is still unbelievable from my perspective in terms of how Americans are migrating their communications from wired systems to wireless systems. And I think one of the other very bullish indicators for this wireless industry and all of what we do together to bring services to the consumer was that data services were up 70% year over year. They're now a full 11% of the revenues. They were $6.5 billion for the first 6 months of 2006. 11% of the $60.5 billion that the industry posted for overall for overall revenues. So data is no longer one of those items that we talk about as coming down the road. It's 11% of the revenues to date, and continuing to grow 70% year to year, growing at an astounding rate as well. And so what that demonstrates is it's more than just us communicating a voice call on these phones. We're doing many more things with these phones. And that just goes to punctuate, I think, the point that Jeff was making, which in my view suggests that the march is still on. And the march, in my view, is the continued migration of wired revenues, wired communications revenues to wireless devices. And as we continue to make more and more robust networks available to the consumers and bring these applications to bear, I think those trends are going to continue to go up from where we see them today.
Definitely the wireless industry is a great industry to be serving because of its growth and its size. As far as the tower industry, I would characterize it with two key words. One is stability, and the second is continuity. From a stability point of view, all four of the companies represented here got larger last year. AT&T was acquired by SBA. Crown Castle made two sizable acquisitions over the past year or so. We merged with SpectraSite, and Jerry's company bought the Sprint Tower. So you've got four sizable companies, very stable, I would say, really across the board. And our ability to get and keep business also has stabilized. Our churn rates as an industry are lower than ever. The customers who have themselves bulked up and become more stable. I will actually argue at the end of the day, Sprint, Nextel, and Sling or AT&T mergers are good for the tower industry in the mid and long run, and even in the short run. So we've got more stable customer base. We're getting bigger. It allows us to be more stable as companies sort of anchoring this industry. On the continuity side, it's continuity of growth. I mean, the growth rates among the four companies that we represent are within a couple percentage point band quarter to quarter. It's north of 10% year over year, pretty much across the board, very consistently. And we expect that our company, and I believe that the rest of the companies expect that substantial growth rates for us will continue into the future. So we've got continuity on the growth side, stability as far as having the scale and size to be able to weather the big business cycles that may be to come, and I think we're in very good shape today.
Yeah, I would certainly agree with everything that has already been said. Just to add a couple of thoughts. I mean, I'm a newcomer to the industry, but one of the principal reasons I'm here is because of everything that Jeff and John and Jim just said. So have a shake. The industry is interesting because 5 years ago it was fairly volatile and up and down, and I think outsiders thought it was kind of a little bit unstable, just to play off of Jim's choice of words. And I think I've seen it as an outsider really enter a new phase of stability again, and I think it's extremely healthy going forward. But we are seeing the secular or macro trends really continue to be very strong backs in our wind, whether it's the benefits of the AWS auction, Sprint's 4G build-out that's coming up, even the 700 auctions that are coming up in a year or two. So lots of good things happening. The other thing, just from a personal observation, I've had the benefit of being able to spend a little bit of time with one of my daughters who goes to college here in Nashville, and I'm always struck every time I'm around that generation of Americans as to how wireless those Americans.
Ultimately, you have that same phenomenon on data versus non-data. The data will be actually the majority of the traffic and revenues eventually, and with that, would forecast for growth is, as you point out, enormous. That would be a huge growth factor to get to there, and I think it's inevitable. The question is, how long does it take, not whether it happens.
I mean, I think that's right, and I think that Jerry's point, which is very well made. Too often, sometimes I'll look at things and I'll look at it from my perspective, and the question of are there communications activities, whether they be voice or data, that I'm willing to do at a fixed device, a computer. I'll look at it from my generation's perspective, and though I'm certainly a lot more mobile than the last generation, I'm probably still not quite as mobile as the next generation. And so I might look at it and think, well, do I absolutely need to be able to do everything from a mobile device, from a data session? Do I need to be able to access huge presentations and things of that sort? You say, well, no, I can probably wait to get back to my office, either at home or at the office. But as Jerry points out, it's a generational kind of an issue. And the reality is that the next generation isn't willing to get plugged in someplace. They want their communications, whatever that happens to be available to them wherever they happen to go. And you can just see that as you do, in fact, witness the next generation on college campuses around the country. The reality is those college campuses that are not unwired, and unwired everywhere, in the dorms, out on the greens, in the dining halls, so forth and so on, students are in an uproar. They absolutely, and it's not as if these college campuses are necessarily, the size of Manhattan, but fundamentally they want to be able to use it wherever. And I think that's what we're otherwise building networks to support.
Let me ask the kind of reverse side of that question. Is there a growth rate at which it's hard to keep up with that demand? Is there a challenge to the industry to be able to keep up with that growth year after year after year? Or can you handle that? That's just a great situation.
I think our industry can handle it. I think the real gating issue, Mike, is going to be the devices. The devices that ultimately are developed to allow data and video and those services is, I think, going to be the gating factor. And depending on how those devices develop and how neat they are and user-friendly is really going to govern the growth in that data. But from our industry's perspective, I think we're extremely well situated to build out and service the needs of our wireless carrier customers for whatever data uses and service that they will need. So I speaking for all of us, we won't be the holdup in any type of data deployments. And we're all actually, obviously we're all very interested and excited about the development here. And we hope it continues to grow. We think it will continue to grow because that will be very good for the industry. But we're ready.
Good. Great. That's very good news. Do you see any significant risk or threat looming out there in the larger world? The opposite. Jerry, you on this side?
I thought a lot about trying to come up with some significant risks that I would really lose sleep over. It was hard for me to come up with something, to be honest with you. I think the rate of growth will vary over the years. I don't think, certainly things don't go straight to the moon. And I think there will be different levels of growth depending on particular build-out activities with respect to driven or market launch driven by some of the regional carriers or newer entrants. But in terms of, if I look at the business over 5 years, which is how I do try to look at the business, it's frankly pretty difficult for me to come up with anything that I spend a lot of time worrying about. I mean, there's, I guess, things that are a little frustrating from time to time on whether it's zoning issues or landlord issues and those kinds of things on particular sites. But again, from a bigger picture perspective on the business and long-term trends, if people understand that there will be variation any given year on the growth rates, both in revenue as well as cash flow, sometimes you got to make some investments in the future. But I think as long as people understand that longer-term perspective, it's very easy to be very, very positive about the business.
The way I look at risk going forward is to characterize our wireless industry customer base that we know today that's going to enter the market over the next few years is having 3 waves. The first is moving maybe closer towards the beach. It's the voice wave, which came first, that wireline to wireless migration John talked about. Data is now up and coming strong as far as the next wave of opportunity for our industry. And behind it, just getting started, I think, is the third wave, which is entertainment services. So it's the TV, music, device-to-device kind of services that Jeff alluded to. The devices aren't even invented yet for some of these things. That's going to come. The risk then, if that allows us to have a continuity of growth in this industry, those 3 waves moving forward, is a disruption of those waves. That could come in the course of, can these carriers and other providers actually create a business plan that their investors can support, that makes enough money to do the investments it's going to take to get those 3 waves from wireline to wireless. And I think that's an important question. It'll take years to play out, but I think if it plays out well, we will have continuity of growth in this industry for a long time.
Any other comments on that?
I would just echo one of the points that Jerry made and continue to appeal to the collective members of this group here. What I like about this conference is it's still of a size that many of us know each other. And that is that I think the one frustration / risk is that success at times can breed a certain response from local communities when it comes to enabling us to build the infrastructure necessary to support the applications that Jim was just talking about. And frustrating, yes, but there are some communities, there are some states, most specifically California, where it's entirely possible that services will be attempted, but they just simply will not be reliable enough, and so the user experience is not going to be what it could be if we were otherwise enabled to build the requisite infrastructure to support some of these new services. As we get into the data and video applications, it takes a different network architecture to what was just a pure voice architecture. And I think it's incumbent upon all of us in this industry to continue to be appealing to the various different bodies that we all meet with, whether or not it's meeting with local zoning and planning, or whether or not it's just talking within communities to the people that live there. Because fundamentally, it's the people that live there that are otherwise enabling these planning and zoning bodies to act the way they do. I think it's incumbent upon all of us to ensure that people understand that we do want these services. We do want them enabled on a wireless device, and in order to do that, they want that the people in the community want to ensure that their community isn't left behind because their local zoning and planning commission wasn't willing to let one of our companies do what we need to do to enable that service.
It's a very good point, and it's very interesting. We work so hard on this issue as we must, as an association and as individual companies. It's interesting to me how little understanding there is that the sites are what gets the wireless signal to the wireless device. And there's almost a mentality out there of, oh, they're incidental, you know, you could put them over behind the hill and that would be fine. And so I've always thought that I have T-shirts that say no sites, no service. Something along that line. But anyway, those are very good points. And I feel like from the association standpoint, we are making some headway with education, and it's a long haul process, but it's a lot. The prospect, at least, is more positive if we can educate people before there's a specific controversy than when you're already in the midst of a heated controversy at the local level, and for whatever reason, citizens are wound up, or the zoning authority is wound up, and you're trying to walk that back. And so we're making a lot of effort kind of at the front end of the process to get to planners, to get to city elected officials, to get to state elected officials, and educate them that this is about quality of service, and quality of service is not just about convenience, it's about the whole economy of your community, of your county, of your state, whatever the case may be. And I hope that as that continues, we can almost get to a competitive situation among different jurisdictions where they want to be more progressive as in having this development go forward faster and better because of the economic, public safety, and personal convenience factors. I mean, it really cuts across everything now. So I think we're making some headway, but there's a long way to go and a lot of work to continue to do. But we do see some responsiveness to that, especially on the economic argument side. People really are now starting to appreciate that if you don't have the good quality, reliable wireless service, you're at an economic disadvantage, and businesses will vote with their feet, as it were, on there. So that, I think, is a very strong argument that we may continue to make.
Mike, as I listen to my three colleagues talk about risks, it's actually pretty refreshing, because when you really think about it, you're talking about small risks, really, as in terms of risk go. We've gotten to the point, and knock on wood, I hope I can still say this 5 years from now, but we're worried about things, rightfully so, worried about things that are going to dictate whether we grow 10%, 12%, 14%. I really don't feel that there's any big risk out there the way, I don't think we're going to be 8-track tape recorders in 5 years. It's really hard to see something that will attack the fundamental stability of our business. We watch carefully for, what I worry about is technology change, something that could obsolete our industry as a distribution channel for wireless or communications. And, we certainly don't see anything out there that comes close to that. But it's, and our balance sheets have been fixed. We probably would have had a different risk conversation, 3, 4, 5 years ago. But for the audience, when you think about the risks that we've all identified, they're very incremental. And it really, I think, does underscore, what a strong industry we have.
Thank you, good point. Jim, you referred to consolidation and that it's been a positive effect overall. You see more consolidation coming? You think it's kind of stabilized for now on either the tower side or the carrier side?
Well, we weren't sure initially that these mergers were going to be beneficial or not to the tower industry. And there is going to be some decommissioning from certainly the Singular AT&T merger, and ultimately maybe Nextel. But what it enabled those two companies, the two new companies, to do was to have, again, the size, stability, scale to launch 3G networks at a pace that the 4 original companies never could have done. It gave Sprint, Nextel, and ultimately probably others in the industry the vision to look past that 3G deployment to what they need to do next, and to maybe compete in other arenas like fixed wireless. So I think for our industry, in the long run, those consolidations were ultimately beneficial, although there's some negatives that we'll work through. Again, it adds to the stability and continuity part of looking at our business, because those sizable wireless players can now really plan and build for the long run. And that's the kind of business model that we're built up to support. There may be further consolidation. I think it's less likely than prior years. The two candidates people would consider would be Alltel, maybe linking up in some way with Verizon ultimately, or T-Mobile ultimately linking up in some way with Singular. I think on both of those fronts, there may be regulatory concerns from an antitrust perspective, and it may, in fact, not be what the companies themselves want to do at Alltel and T-Mobile. So unlikely or less likely, I think, going forward as far as major consolidation goes.
Thanks. Anyone else with views on that? Okay, thanks. Last year when we met in Hollywood, Florida, we were bracketed by 2 of the 6, I think, worst hurricanes in Atlantic coast history. And it was certainly a huge impact on the country as well as the industry. Now a year out, and happily, contrary to the initial forecast, this season has been a pretty mild one. Great. Looking back on the storms and the storm recovery, do you have any thoughts on the impact of the storms or how things have changed a year further along in anticipation of future problems? Start anywhere.
One of the things that I am pleased with, looking back now at what's happened since those various different hurricanes, and maybe it was just the fact that there were so many in a row that were hitting one state, just one after the other, that causes people to kind of wake up and look at what is it that's otherwise impacting these devices. With 219 million Americans now with a wireless device, again, success breeds responsibility, and people are relying upon those devices to work in a natural disaster. what was somewhat intriguing was to hear people talk about the reason why they would still have a landline phone was that because in an emergency situation like the hurricanes, the landline phone still generated dial tone. And that's because those of you that are from the landline business know that the batteries, as it were, that generate the dial tone are sitting back in these bunker-proof central offices and things of that sort. The problem we had as an industry is clearly the connections between our wireless sites and the outside world were problematic, and that was power, and that was also backhaul. Because notwithstanding the fact that you could get dial tone at your house, in a lot of cases, phone lines were in fact down to specific cell sites, tree branches or whatever fall on them. And what I'm finding that is, I think, important is that carriers are responding by building out emergency power backup at the sites, not relying on an 8 to 10 hour battery backup supply. It's in an emergency situation. Part of the problem, of course, is everybody's using their phone at the same time, so it tends to draw that battery down a whole lot faster than it would under normal circumstances. So they're building emergency power backup at the sites and looking for redundant backhaul links as well. Those are the two things that are necessary to start hardening these sites, because unfortunately, and thank goodness that it hasn't been more of a active season, but it isn't really a question of if, but I think all Floridians and those that live along the Gulf Coast recognize that it's just the nature of where they live. They have some fantastic benefits of living there, and then there are some downsides of living there. I look at our friends from Raymond James, Tampa residents as well. And so, you know, to offset the benefit, you have to have some of that. And what you're counting on is that those companies that are servicing those areas have relied on past experience to learn from it and corrected it. And I'm seeing those steps. The only thing that I'm somewhat still questioning is the placement of some of those equipment, whether it was replacement of the shelters or the power backup, because as we clearly learned from Katrina, some of that's got to be lifted off the ground if it's going to work, because a generator under 10 feet of water probably isn't going to do too much for you. So that would be the only thing that I still think that there's going to be some additional work necessary as we go forward. But I'm seeing a lot of positive steps to harden these sites that will make them a lot more reliable in future natural disasters.
Yeah, I would agree with John. The issues really were power. They were not infrastructure. We had a lot of towers along the Gulf Coast, as do everybody up here. We lost one tower, didn't even go down. It was just tilted over in Biloxi, Mississippi. It was quickly restored, but it really was much more the power issue. I'll tell you the biggest issue for us was not really the assets, but it was our people. It's tough. When you have a month straight of storms down there and you don't know whether you're coming or going or where you're going to get your next hot shower, we learned a lot and grew as a company really along just general contingency planning lines. Kurt and the team were busy on the assets, but our human resources team was even busier coming up with planning, and we did learn a lot, and I think we grew as an industry because of it. Certainly we did as a company. An unfortunate result that has come out of it, which is a little bit unfair, because I think our industry did extremely well in terms of the assets coming through those storms. But property and casualty insurance in general just shot to the moon. And everybody's feeling that across all business lines. And, it's caused us to rethink how we might want to manage those risks going forward, because, at the insurance level, everybody is all interconnected there, and everybody bears the burden of that, notwithstanding that our industry, I think, fared very, very well. I think we're all better off. It'll always be a disruption when something like that happens, and there'll be some tragedy, but we're clearly in a much better position today as an industry and as a company than we were 2 years ago.
I think it's also valuable to look at that hurricane experience as a case study of, again, the stability of the towers. We had in American Tower 400 towers in the affected zone. Less than 15 of those were damaged to an extent that customers were interrupted or we had to rebuild or significantly repair the tower. 15 out of 400 is a pretty small percentage of your asset base in what could be argued was the worst natural disaster of at least the last century.
Right.
So again, it plays to the stability of the tower industry and even the continuity for growth, because we can weather, we think, business cycles, weather cycles, other kinds of ups and downs that other businesses would be more greatly affected.
Hey, just to add to all the comments, one thought is I do agree. I think the power industry is in very good shape, and for local signal, we just had a handful of sites that were actually physically affected, which really surprised me. I was finding out after the fact and nothing afterwards, but I would have expected a lot more damage than actually resulted. The thing I do worry more about, even though I agree that progress is being made, is on the barrier side, particularly on the power side, because we're hardening a lot of sites, a lot of generators, but I think it's a work in progress. And, having experienced the situation on 9/11 where I was in Manhattan when the communication system went down, it's a pretty frightening, debilitating experience for not just the first responders, emergency personnel, which obviously is very detrimental to them, but also just everybody involved in the situation. Katrina, I think, was the same way. And I do worry that we're not making enough progress as an industry, broadly speaking, wireless in the country. I think I read something a couple of weeks ago from Reed Hunt, the former FCC chair, that said every time we have a major national catastrophe, we learn that our communication system doesn't work very well, and at the end of the day, we don't know very much about it. So I think time will tell whether we're doing enough and doing the right things. As I said, I think we are doing some things. I hope we're doing enough, particularly on the carrier side, and the power side.
All of your comments are very consistent with the FCC findings. Heard yesterday at lunch from the chair of the FCC's independent panel looking into the impact of Hurricane Katrina, and what she reported was in their very formal report was that infrastructure itself weathered the storm incredibly well, particularly given the magnitude of those storms last year. Off the charts bracket. And that the problems were flooding, backup power issues, and after the storm access, where there was a lot of confusion about who had priority to get to sites to do repairs, which credentials did you have to have from which local, state, federal authority, and those sort of things. The infrastructure itself was very, very sound, remarkably sound, given the forces that are subjected to. So thank you. People have referenced the FCC's AWS Advanced Wireless Service Auction that ended on Monday, just 2 days ago. Raised almost $14 billion. There are 104 new licensed winners who've won over 1,000 licenses, different sizes, different subdivisions of the country. They've spent a lot of money to get that spectrum. Do they have the money to build it out? The winners, the big winners in terms of dollars, are familiar names. I think T-Mobile was at the very top of the list. Sprint and the cable companies, Singular, Verizon, Leap and Cricket were in the top 10. You anticipate, or is it too soon to even have an informed estimate as to a fast build-out, a slow build-out? Do we have to stop and think about what they're going to do with their new family assets, or are they likely to have a game plan ready to roll out relatively quickly?
Such a polite group. You're right in some of the names. Clearly, there were also some other new players to the business, new players to certain geographies. You had a number of the regionals, Metro PCS and Leap, Launch Cricket, that were successful in a lot of new markets as well. And then you had Spectrum Co., the cable company consortium, that was successful in a number of markets as well. And so the question of fast or slow, I think that when a company spends, in the case of a Metro and Leap, in excess of $1 billion, almost $1.4 billion in one case, $1.1 billion in the other case, their investors are going to be seeking a return on that $1 billion. And the only way that a return is going to be generated is you turn something on and you start getting subscribers and you generate revenues and profits. And so I would venture that they are certainly euphoric that the auction is over. They're euphoric about those properties that they were able to win. And they are really focused now on the specific prioritization of what to build first. And clearly, I think there's going to be opportunities in just the new hire side of the equation. You've got to start putting people into place. You got to start entering into contracts to do the designs, to otherwise ensure that you've got people that are going to be able to handle the builds. All of that kind of activity is going to be going on. And so, clearly from an investor perspective in a public tower company, one of the things that people are trying to figure out is, well, when does all this start manifesting itself as revenue to you folks? By virtue of all those other things that I was just indicating, I don't think that this is a 2007 revenue-generating event for public tower companies. I think that there is going to be a lot of activity between now and the tail end of 2007, and there will be greater and greater visibility as to what this might mean for 2008 and beyond as we progress through 2007. And certainly we would be happy to be talking about that visibility as we get it during our quarterly calls going into 2007. But I think that it's certainly exciting because you have players that are very interested in doing something with their big billion-dollar investments. T-Mobile certainly was well known to have been interested in expanding their spectrum position. This is going to allow them to do new things, to bring new applications to bear, expand their reach to their customers. And I think for those that didn't have compromised spectrum positions that were otherwise participants in this auction, what it is it's an enablement to bring some of these new applications that Jim was speaking about at the early part of this session to market. And I think that's all very exciting as well, because the more applications that are brought to bear, I think the more we're going to benefit as a collective industry. Because it gets to that one fundamental point that I think is rather intriguing out there, and that is this notion of, will there ever be greater than 100% penetration in the U.S. population? If you start hitting 219 million subs, that's always the one big question. In the end, if you have OnStar in your GM vehicle, is that a subscription account to those of you that have got that? It isn't counted as one necessarily, and yet it's certainly a subscription. There's somebody that's paying a monthly fee to use a wireless network to otherwise generate the OnStar services that you're getting. I think that's what we're going to start to see. So the notion of subscriptions, which today is pretty much associated with a person who has a device that's predominantly used for voice. Maybe they've got a secondary device that is specific data, but it's a phone number kind of a metric. I think that what we'll be seeing is as these new applications are otherwise deployed, there are going to be different devices that are going to have wireless connectivity that may or may not be viewed as a subscription, and so that, yes, it will go beyond 100% penetration of the U.S. population. And this spectrum auction is an enablement to seeing those new applications brought to bear. So I think it's very exciting. But again, for the investors in the room, I would not suggest that this is a revenue event for 2007. We will bring more visibility through 2007. It's kind of an 08 in our view and beyond kind of event.
Well, to that point, one analyst was quoted during the auction, before it was concluded, that estimated that this would contribute an incremental 14% to annualized tower industry free cash flow in 2008. That seem in the ballpark, or?
I was surprised that it wasn't 13.925. With all due respect, I think that it's still, it depends upon how one wants to model things. And, is it good for the industry? I think the macro answer to that is it's good for the industry. And what exactly it does from the standpoint of growth in cash flow above what the existing models that that companies and investors and analysts all have is going to be still something debatable, I would suggest.
Yeah, I think the analyst community really tries to extract information from us with a degree of specificity that, we wish we could tell you, but we don't know. I mean, clearly it's directionally a good thing for the industry. It is, I think, for the first time since maybe the mid-90s, a big enough chunk of spectrum that we now know. We just know it. We can't quantify, we can't tell you how many sites, but this is going to add years of work. I mean, one of the things that we've always, and Jim has talked about a lot, we're a very stable, very continuous industry, but it's always been hard to put your fingers around the next year because carriers budget on a yearly basis and they don't, go beyond that. But I mean, we all know this is going to be a 2007, 2008, 2009, and beyond. And I think for everybody in this room, whether you're a tower company or in any way associated with the industry, there's going to be a lot of stuff to do, a lot of work, and we're all going to benefit. And is it 13.92 or 14.08? Who the heck knows? But it's definitely a positive for the industry, and we're all going to be better off for it.
Well, I'm thinking about this in waves. It won't come in just one sec, sorry, but thinking about it in waves, if you have this pretty substantial wave now, followed by the 700 megahertz auction spectrum in 2009.
Conceptually, I think there's two sets of winners here. One is T-Mobile, Metro PCS, and these very small regionals. They have a business plan already. They know what they're going to use spectrum for. They've already started work. They've got the infrastructure internally in the organization to roll out another set of spectrum in overlay fashion or new market fashion when it comes to Metro. The second category are Sprint, Verizon, Singular, in my view, because I think those sets of spectrum will be used for maybe that third wave of service, some sort of data entertainment project that isn't totally defined. Those first category players, in my view, we will see leases by the end of 2007. Not sure when exactly they'll commence, but the spectrum clearing required in the 1.7, 2.1 spectrum category is going to take a year to 2 years probably. And I don't think people are going to sit back and not lease up sites until every last original user is off that spectrum. So I do think we'll see leases in the back half of 2007 from the first group. Be very interesting to see what the business plan is in the second group, because they're all, again, very well funded, looking forward into not just 3G but 4G world. And I think, again, as Jeff said, this is more continuity of growth for this industry. A little tricky to quantify exactly where that vector sits, but it's going to be there and it's going to be there for a while.
Yeah, I just to add to that, I think the second group, my own view, is that they're probably warehousing for the third wave, entertainment wave, particularly video. It's the analyst room, it's just my opinion, I have no information. I'm passing on here. But,
yeah, the little safe harbor card.
the other group, though, that I think is very interesting is the cable companies. I think we're all somewhat sort of scratching our heads on exactly where that goes, whether that's warehousing, whether it's somehow fitting the dynamic of an arrangement they've got with Sprint today. That's a 3-year exclusive arrangement. So I think that one, to me, is a little bit less clear on sort of where that goes. Clearly, it's a very valuable asset or piece of raw land acquired that gives them a lot of optionality over time. But I think, at least to me, that's one piece that's not quite as clear how that develops in the next 2 or 3 years.
We're almost out of time. Let me ask one last question about the state wireless associations. PCIA supports them. Your companies participate in them. There's been a lot of growth. It's been very effective in some of the states on helping with legislation, especially regarding co-location rights, which is a very significant factor in the industry. Just express briefly your views on the state association.
I think they're great, and we're going to continue to do whatever we can to foster their activity and growth. When I first got involved with PCIA several years ago, our focus was a little bit more federal. But as the years have passed, the issues that really face our industry in terms of co-location and certainly asset growth are much more at the state and local levels. And to effectively deal with those, you do need grassroots organizations, people right there on the scene, and that's where these state wireless associations fit in perfectly. So I'm particularly happy that we continue PCIA to foster and grow, and I think that's going to be an even greater focus of the organization as we move forward, but we're all for it.
Absolutely, echo Jeff's points. I'm a very big supporter. I'm pleased that many people in my company are in active roles in some of the states from a leadership perspective on those particular associations. I think that it's just abundantly clear that when it comes to land use issues, it's very definitely local and state that are going to make the difference in our ability to build out the infrastructure we've been talking about. And so I encourage anybody that is otherwise unaware of what those associations do, who belongs to them, to reach out on the show floor and get more information about it, because they're making a difference. And I'm very pleased that they have been formed. I look forward to there being one in every state, and continuing to make the progress that we have in some states in controlling some of the adverse rules that seem to pop up every year.
They also have a ton of golf tournaments.
Thoughts on that?
I think these state associations are a very valuable vehicle for something that I would actually encourage much more broadly for everyone here. And that is a vehicle for collaboration between the wireless carriers and the tower companies. Our mission at our company is to enable wireless carriers to more rapidly and efficiently deploy their advanced networks. So we have the same goal, I think. On the other hand, there are contractual and pricing and all those other issues you got to work out as supplier and customer. However, the mission of the two sets of companies really are aligned, and these are good vehicles, and we should find others that, including PCIA itself, where our customer base and the supplier base here can work together towards the same goal.
You know, I've along the same lines, really noticed how the carriers and the tower companies are much more intimate with each other at the state level, tend to work very collaboratively and effectively on a lot of the land use issues, because I think that's really our greatest chance of success on a lot of those issues. Is we get local people expressing local views. That usually has a lot more impact than somebody parachuting in and has clearly got an agenda, a hired gun from somebody else. So our folks have gotten increasingly involved at the state level and even local levels. Hope they'll continue to do that. And it'd be great to see more active participation, both from the tower side as well as the carrier side, in every state across the country.
Right, we tallied up yesterday or the day before with forming associations in addition to existing associations. We'll have 25 states with associations. There are still some more coming through the pipeline, but they're really just getting started in the coordination process. But halfway there is a pretty good benchmark in a relatively short period of time, and we'll keep working it. You'll see all the state associations at center stage on the show floor, and the show floor opens immediately after this session. We're all going there, and we hope you'll come with us. And I think that we're out of time. We're actually a little past time, so I'd like to thank all our panelists. This exchange is always very informative, and while there's a lot of consistency of views, there are always some significant details that are different and that are a valuable learning experience as far as I'm concerned. So thank you all.